Hello and welcome to the latest edition of Cybersecurity discussions between Ideal Integrations, Blue Bastion, and Henderson Brothers. So I'm Michael Stratos from Ideal Integrations, and I have with me Luke McOmie, Corey Bussard, Dan Coast, and Pete Horne. Luke and Corey from Blue Bastion, and Pete Horne and Dan Coast from Henderson Brothers. The roundtables are designed to address critical areas of security protocols, risk management, and financing strategies in short segments. Today's topic is cost management. In one of our last episodes, we discussed an organization's preparation for incident and incident response. Now we want to focus on balancing the cost of such activities. So my first question addressed to Luke and Corey: if you have an organization with a small budget, what are the essential security protocols you seek to put in place to help ensure protection but still control costs?
Yeah, so I would say you'd want to review what you have in place already today. That's typically step one, right? You don't want to start by just saying, oh, we need a bunch of new tools. So you have to start with, what do you have in place today? And then you need to evaluate what you have in place and where are some of your gaps. And typically, I'll let Luke speak to that a little bit more, but that's typically through some type of an evaluation or assessment. Some of the other things that you'd want to look at are, do you have what we would consider some of the essentials would be things like multi-factor authentication against all of your perimeter items at bare minimum. Do you have things like SIEM? Do you have an antivirus in place? You know, how are you connecting the organization? Because in the times still, we have a lot of folks that are working from home or working from home permanently. So how are you securing the endpoints in their home from all of the other things that are on the networks that you no longer control? So that's what I would say some of the security essentials that we would say would be. And then I'll let Luke talk about some of the red team side.
Sure. Yeah. From an offensive perspective, I think one of the most important things is understanding literally the basics, right? Just the assets. Where are all of your hosts? What software are they running? What does that look like? Just having that understanding of where your potential points of exposure or vulnerability may be is a big critical first step. Conducting things like external penetration testing against those externally exposed resources is another good way to be able to make sure that you don't have any low-hanging fruit or something that's going to be easily hacked by somebody that just stumbles across it out there on the internet. Really, it's kind of that, how do we eat the elephant one bite at a time? And understanding really the priority to your business that each of these different assets or environments play, it really can help you determine the criticality and the order in which you should be testing or validating them.
So as I look at this, basically, when it comes to security, there is no finish line, right? It's a marathon. You're always going to be doing this. So I guess as you're making these decisions, you're always looking at them, like you said, what's most impactful, but also generating or at least having an idea of what the overall posture should be, even if you have to take a phased approach to get there. And like you said, understanding what those gaps are. I think that's very important. So if you don't have the budget to do everything, what are the risks that you're accepting because you don't have the budget to take care of everything. So as an organization's budget grows for security over time, which it does or hopefully should, what are the areas of spend that you think generate the most positive impact on an organization's security posture?
Yeah, I'll jump in first on this one. I think that really, again, having a clear and concise program about where you're going, what you're trying to accomplish, and what you want to do is really a key first step in how you assign that budget, how you define your timelines and the program management around what you're doing first, when you're doing things, what can be done when it's overlapping. But I think that one of the big focuses are making sure that as you are maturing, you really do have a focus on those four pillars, right? People, process, technology, and data. And when you start doing testing, I'll give you an example. One of the big mistakes we see with immature or younger companies is that they'll come to us and they'll ask, we want an external pen test. We just want to make sure that our servers are hardened and properly protected. But what they don't realize is that 90+% of these different compromises that we're dealing with right now, that we're seeing with these various customers, are through phishing, right? It's people getting a bad email, clicking a link, So then all of a sudden, when you start understanding, you know, the likelihood of attack and the way that we're seeing these attacks, something like security awareness training and doing phishing as part of your offensive testing really does become a critical item, right? So maybe that's the first thing you do. And as your program advances, you continue to add different iterations of testing, right? Internal simulated breach, or, you know, adversarial threat emulation type attacks. All of those types of things can really help you mature and understand where you're most vulnerable and where you're most likely to get attacked. Corey?
Yeah, absolutely. And just to go back to what Luke said in the previous question, asset inventory, knowing what's on your network, knowing what's there, that's a really big first step as well, because you can't secure something that you don't even know exists or is on your network. So that's one of the biggest things I'll say to that is you'll want to ensure that you understand what's on your network and what's connecting into your network, whether that's through asset management, whether that's through a combination of asset management, logging, etc. Those are some very, very basic steps that absolutely need to be taken. And then utilizing those solutions to ensure that whenever you take those additional steps, things like OS hardening, things like antiviruses, any type of agent-based solution, now you have a way to tell, is all of the assets that are on my network protected by those investments that I just made? Because without them, you're just going to be kind of picking and choosing what you're going to be throwing agents on, or what you're going to be logging, or whatever that ends up being from your budget. You really have to have a good handle and grasp of what's on your network as a base to that.
So Dan, Pete, we've talked about the rapidly changing market for cyber liability insurance before. What can you do to benchmark insurance costs, design a risk management program for every budget, and balance what is going on right now in the turbulent cyber insurance world?
Sure. So I think to look at the market, we have to think about things in terms of industry segment first. A healthcare system, financial technology company, software developers, certainly their risk is much greater than maybe a manufacturing risk. And when you think about total cost of risk, you know, those organizations their cyber spend may be dramatically more than another business's cyber spend. So we have to think about it in terms of those industry segments. And some of those industry segments are much more challenging than others. I will say though, you know, you mentioned MFA. We talked about this before. I mean, MFA is, those are table stakes now. You got to have it to really even procure a policy at this point in the market. But, you know, when we're thinking about structuring a cyber program, I think first and foremost, we have to think about what's a cost of a breach to the organization. So let's look at, you know, what type of records is the organization storing? Who are their customers? If a breach happened, how is it going to impact their downstream customers and supply chain and things like that? And what are the ramifications back to the interruption of the business and ultimately the income loss there? So we've got some modeling that we do. We've invested in some really great tools to help us understand what the cost of the breach would be, and what the cost of risk transfer looks like. And from there, we can then go out and build that cyber program from there. I will say, you know, for many businesses though, still, you know, cyber for a $1 million, $3 million, $5 million policy, that coverage is still dramatically less than their workers' comp policy or their general liability or property. Yet, you know, a catastrophic cyber breach can have the same implications it could have on a fire. It just comes in by different form, right? So I think it's really important that we spend a lot of time on this and get it right.
So I have these conversations a lot. Matter of fact, I had one this morning at a breakfast meeting. This is going to be changing a lot over the next so many years. Obviously, I think that there's just not enough data for insurance companies to quite figure out how to manage this. I've heard lots of things. We've talked about at some point ransomware not being part of coverage, that they just don't cover it anymore. I've heard that, you know, if somebody has a $1 million cyber liability policy, that they are going to have sublimits on things like ransomware will only be $100,000 of that policy and whatnot. And then the other part that when we were talking about that, you said you won't get coverage unless you have MFA. And then immediately my brain goes to, well, MFA on what? Everything? Just web access to email or VPN? Because there's a lot of things that, in my opinion, you need MFA for. Are you doing it for everything? You should, right? It's not as simple as it sounds, right? There's some deeper conversations there. So those are the things that are going through my head. And I'm sure the people that listen to this are going to be thinking, okay, well, to what extent? It's a deeper conversation. So
yeah, and I've seen some insurers take that approach where we need to see MFA on everything. In lieu of that, we're going to be unable to offer terms. So
again, I'll go back to, there are things that we know that people have from an infrastructure perspective that don't support it right now. They don't have a choice. Right. So what do you do? Now you have to find some kind of alternative. So
yeah, and there are alternative markets. There's the London syndicates. There's other places where you can go to get the coverage. So to your point, though, I mean, this thing is it's changing by the week, probably by the hour, quite frankly, based on the velocity at which these ransom attacks are occurring. So it's something that we just have to keep. I think we're going to be having these video segments for a long time to come, based on what's going on out there.
Right. Dot 2, right? Next version. So, all right, we're probably going over our time a little bit here. Does anybody else have any final comments before we wrap things up?
Yep. I mean, I'll mention just something on the summary of what I've heard. I mean, whether we're talking about cost containment or, still making that individual investment decision on a security item that's going to benefit your organization, understanding your people could be an asset or liability. Maybe we should track them in Corey's recommendation to start with inventory tracking. And, there's always a few items that, let's call them low-hanging fruit, or in a relative low-cost investment that you could do to make yourself better. And then it's not just, I'm done, I've reached that plateau. It's, as Michael, you said, it's a never-ending, venture to go through cybersecurity. And, we've talked about preparation in some of these last episodes, and now kind of cost containment, risk management. We're emphasizing an ongoing and more thoughtful approach that talks about what are all your technical endpoints and assets, and include your people on that.
So, all right, well, I want to thank everyone for joining today and chiming in on this. Luke, Corey, Dan, Pete, appreciate it. And everybody else out there, stay safe.
Thanks.